All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started. My name is Daisy Bedoya Sotelo. I use pronoun she, ella, and I work here at OHE. And I know I had already said this at the beginning of the session, but we really want to thank you for being accommodating since we ended up changing the times, the dates for this training, but we're very excited to see you all and joining us for the second session. I'm just going to do a really brief Zoom tutorial, just as a reminder for all of us. Once again, we do have interpretation. The interpretation comes up in your glove-like at the bottom of your screen. So if you're needing Spanish interpretation, that is available, as well as ASL, which you see here in the screen as well. So just as a reminder that we have different views, you could see a gallery view where you're able to see the speaker and interpreters. So that's the one that we are recommending since we do have ASL interpretation today. And I just want to start with the land and labor acknowledgement. And every community owes its existence and strength to generations of ancestors who contributed to our hopes, dreams, and collective possibilities. Together, their history allow us to live our own legacy of hope and justice. Our collective history is that of cultural resilience, re-indigenation, adaptability, colonization, settlement, systemic violence, racism, and forced displacement. Acknowledging this truth helps build mutual respect and connection across diverse communities and lived experiences. And for those who are joining and are new to this session today, I do want to just talk a little bit about who OHE is. And OHE is a people of color-led collaborative organized to center and uplift the wisdom of our communities of color through racial justice, inform health equity policies and practices as part of the movement to dismantle white supremacy and shift the imbalance of power. We envision a world where people of color are able to lead fulfilling and healthy lives, however they choose to do so. And we do have different bodies of work, which are advocacy, convener, knowledge center, and part of that convener is having you all here today with us. And just as a reminder to please use the chat box if you have any questions or if you have any needs as well. And we are asking that you say your name before you speak when you are, so that way we know who you are. And once again, the session will be recorded just to make sure that those individuals who could not attend today have that available for them. And lastly, just take care of yourself, right? If you need to get up and stretch, please do so. Go grab a drink of water, whatever it is that you need to do. And without further ado, just welcoming Jaylin. I know some of you all are returning for our second session, but just wanted to mention that she is a member of the Confederate Tribe of Warm Springs and their community health planner in human services, where she advocates for health equity practices and policies. And we're very excited to have our second session. And without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and hand it over to you, Jaylin. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, let me share my screen here. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. Okay. All right. So welcome everybody. Again, my name is Jaylin Seppa. I'm a member of the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. I'm also a descendant of Wasco, Shoshone-Bannock, Yakima, and Cree from Canada. So I'm trying to decide, looking at time here, 1:14. You know what? No, we're not going to do that. We are going to push back on this concept of time, right? And so with that, we're going to go into introductions. I was going to have everybody drop it in the chat, but we're not doing that. We're going to take the time to do it. And so I'm going to ask for name and pronouns, and then a check-in, 1 to 10, how are you feeling? And then the question is, how do you currently engage with tribal communities or tribal leadership? And the way that I like to do this, I'll go first to do an example of what I'm asking you. If you don't feel like going on screen, if you don't feel like talking, please drop it in the chat and I will read it at the end. If you want to, you don't have to come on screen either when you do your intro. I'm going to have you raise your hand. So the function, so you go to reactions and then you do raise hand. And then what I'll ask people to do is just pick the person that's below you in the, that has their hand up, because it'll put us all kind of in a line. And then you just pick the person below you. And then when you get done with your intro, just don't forget to move your hand down, lower your hand. So while folks are doing that, and again, if you don't feel like coming on screen or verbally doing your introduction, please drop it in the chat and I will read it. I really want everybody to be comfortable and show up as you need today. And so take care of yourself. If you need to step away, if you just take care of yourself. So I'm going to start us off. Again, Jalen's up a pronoun she, her. And I am probably like I'm going to say 8.5 or 9. It's definitely a Monday, but I woke up and had some personal things to take care of this morning with my eldest daughter, and we got it done and felt really productive. And I'm doing this aloe juice. It's not a cleanse, but it's an aloe juice. Like I'm adding aloe juice to my diet, I guess I should say. And I'm definitely feeling, I'm on day 5 and I'm definitely feeling the benefits of it. Not feeling as tired and bogged down and things like that. So I'm feeling great. I'm not a morning person, but this morning was a great morning. And how do I currently engage with tribal communities or tribal leadership? So within my role that I'm coming here with SEPA Consulting, I do both. I do, I'm always looking to my community to speak on their experiences and the way that they show up and the way that, and also the reasons why they don't show up. And so I like to hear from my community the barriers, the challenges, and the feelings that they have around the way that organizations and leadership engage with them and share space with them. And then in my work, I then kind of relay that to tribal leadership, to other organizations. Kind of this, that's where this training came from, is when I was within the role of my my job within the tribe specifically. That this really brought up, how do outside organizations and outside folks engage and work with tribal communities and tribal nations. And so I try to, I think of myself as kind of that bridge, and then hopefully there's some handoff at some point to the various, whether it's departments or leaders or whoever is taking on kind of, I like to be that middle person to be able to provide more resources and relationships and partnerships for my tribe and my ultimately the community members who end up receiving resources or trainings, or and then also to lessen the impact of harm that's done within the way that outside organizations and funding also shows up in tribal communities. So I'm going to go down to who's below me, which is Daisy.
Thank you, Jalen. Well, once again, Daisy Vilaya Sotelo, Brand she, ella. I think I'm coming in probably about a 6 or 7. It is Monday. I am coming back from vacation for celebrating my birthday last week. So I feel refreshed, but also a little bit tired. And I think how I'm currently engaging, I think just learning more in these trainings, right? And about the needs of the community. And then I think I come from like just a space of learning rather than, how I am engaging, but definitely, we have some partners that we've been working with, and very excited to continue to learn more about how we can continue to do this work together. Let's see who is below me. It is Dory. I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Dory Sumstead. I'm a traditional health worker liaison with Trillium Community Health Plans. I use she, her pronouns. As far as a check-in today, I'm actually doing pretty good. An 8. I went to a wedding yesterday, or actually last night, that was very, very beautiful. So it left me feeling really good about life. Nothing about just about young folks starting their life together. It was so inspiring. Let's see, how do I currently engage with tribal communities or tribal leadership? Right now, I am new in my position. Originally from Alaska. I'm Alaska Native from the Urutsakamute Native tribe in Southwest Alaska. But I spent many years in the Bend area where I engaged with the Warm Springs tribe. But since I've moved to the Portland area, I have not, other than speaking with Robert, our tribal liaison. So, and I will pass it on to Natalie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is Natalie Begay. I use she and her pronouns. I'm a enrolled citizen of the Diné Nation from New Mexico. Let's see. I actually took the morning off because I worked Saturday, like all day. And so I'm lazy, but I feel good. Like I want to curl up if it were cold in front of a fire and go to sleep. But I feel really good. I'm off camera because it's the very start of my day and just kind of getting going. How do I currently engage? Well, I work at the Native American Youth and Family Center. I am managing our public health programming, community health programs there as a health equity program manager. I also serve as the policy mode lead at the Future Generations Collaborative. And so really deep embedded in the urban Native community. And also I'm a steering committee member. So I also get to engage with other Indigenous programs, communities, and BIPOC communities as well too. So I currently am more engaged with our tribal and urban tribal communities. In previous positions, it was leadership, but here in the urban area, don't get many opportunities for engage with tribal leadership, but still, part of the community. Thanks so much. Below me, I'm trying to switch to gallery mode here, is Esther.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everybody. My name is Esther. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm one of the co-directors at OHE. It's really nice to be here with you all today. I am probably at like a 6 right now. I'm coming back from I'm coming back from some medical leave, and so it's first day back, so that's always fun. Always, take it slow. And then how do I currently engage with tribal communities or tribal leadership? Well, at OHE, we are always thinking about how we can be building genuine relationships with our community partners and in the communities more broadly. And so thinking creatively and, to like what my colleague Daisy had said, listening and, being, how basically like leveraging how we can best support our like tribal partners. And we also work with them. We work on multiple levels from state to like local, county, and just community level. And with that, I'll pass. It looks like Ellen Saliaris is right below me.
Hi, I'm Solaris, she, her, hers. I'm feeling like a good 8, I'll say. how do I currently engage with tribal communities, tribal leadership? I'm about 6 weeks into a new role at the Minnesota Department of Health, and the grant program that I manage, the state legislature finally changed the statute to allow tribal governments and tribes to apply for that grant. And so I've been talking with the tribal and urban Indian health directors and getting started talking with them about, you know, their questions and if this is something they want to learn more about. After me is Owen.
Hi, my name is Owen. I go by he, him. Pretty good. I guess I would say I'm feeling about 9. I don't have a chance to engage with tribal communities or tribal leadership currently, but I'm sure hoping to, particularly with Abenaki bands of Abenaki living in what is now called Vermont. Oh, and under me is Suzanne.
Hello. You're not going to see me on screen because if I turn on my camera, my computer crashes. So you'll get my voice, and I'm glad to be here today. I coordinate a community engagement program, Allies for a Healthier Oregon, at a small nonprofit here in Oregon. How am I feeling today? I'm gonna say 6. I'm concerned about some public health issues that I'm currently researching, but at the same time, I could up that and say that I'm really excited about what's happening tomorrow, which is that we are having a statewide debriefing of our recent legislative session, which ended in June, and we're going to hear about policies and investments that are going to impact health equity and access to healthcare statewide. And one of the panelists for tomorrow gives an example of how we engage with tribal communities. We're having a panel on climate and health, and our statewide public health authority asked Northwest Portland area Indian Health Board to talk about a public health related project that has some state grant funding that the Indian Health Board is doing. We also monitor as best we can how the state agencies and are engaging with tribal communities when we're working on new policies and investments statewide, and also watching the health status data and how much we can discern how tribal communities are doing and how often they're consulted. I can't see who's below me. Can someone else see who's below me?
I think it might be me, Samiko.
Go for it.
Thanks, Suzanne. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Samiko Taylor-Hill, pronouns she, her. Right now, I'm feeling at about an 8. I too was out last week, took some time off last week. And so today's the first day back. And so I'm feeling pretty good and happy to be back at work and to be attending today's second session. I currently engage with tribal communities via the work that OHE does, echoing but what both Esther and Daisy mentioned earlier, as well as just being open and willing to learn and support of our community partners that do the work on the ground with the tribal communities. And yeah, I think that's about it. And I don't see anyone else beneath me, so I'll pass it back to you, Jalen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to go up to the top here and read the chat. Okay. And just fair warning, if I pronounce your name wrong, please correct me. For those of you that was in the first session, it's a big deal for me. I had my name pronounced much of my life wrong. And so I like to make sure that I'm pronouncing people's names right. So I'm not offended or feeling type of way if you correct me if I say your name wrong, and I apologize in advance. Jennifer Webster, she, her, about a 6. My brain is tired and I'm mostly going to be listening via phone so I can take a break from the screen, and currently working on building relationship with tribal communities. Hello, Liz Clement, she, they, hard to assign a number and glad to be here. Not much at all right now, but I've loved partnerships, and I've loved partnerships in the past work, and I'm looking for ways to bring more into my work now. Sorry. I can't say, I'm assuming it says thank you. And thank you for the flexibility in the ways to participate today. I think I'm gonna, Coy, because I saw you had one further down. I'm gonna wait and then read your whole one there. Melissa Bellamontes, she, her, Ella, a 10 today. It's my birthday today. Happy birthday. And I made it to Illinois to spend time with family, and so far it's been a really beautiful time. I participate in a handful of policy and advocacy meetings, and I'm consistently learning about differing / overlapping work tribal communities and my organization are working on. Okay, hold, that's just a reminder. Jay, they, them. I'm at a 2 to 3 today, mostly listening today as well. I don't currently engage with tribal communities. Koi Vu, hopefully I said that right.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do my check-in too, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Koi Vu. I'm the executive director of the Coalition of Community Health Clinics. Didn't think I wanted to raise my hand, but I am now. So thanks for allowing me the space. I'm at a 7. My dog was barking all night, so I was up at 4 o'clock for about an hour and a half, then was able to sleep for a little bit, and then had to wake up really early this morning as well. And so not quite at the higher number. And then currently, as far as relationships with tribes, one of our members is NARA, clinic members is NARA, and we partner quite a bit. And I've had some good working relationships with folks from NAYA, as my role in the past working at ERCO, but we currently don't engage with tribes, and would love to learn more on how to build those relationships.
Thank you. All right. Hello, Patty. Ella, she, her. I'm at a 6-7 going on 15. Too many good things happening. Currently on learning mode and actively trying to engage with tribal youth. These series have been a great support. Love Richardson, she, her. New to my position at Tribal Relations Strategist at Health Share Oregon, feeling a 6 out of 10. I am a current tribal leader and former commissioner of Indian Affairs. I engage professionally as a volunteer, cultural teacher, traditional practitioner, and community member. Hello, Kim. She, her, Community Alliance of Tenants, 6 out of 10. We do not currently directly engage directly with tribes. We have had staff with personal connections to tribal communities, currently seeking to learn more. Hi, everyone. My name is Banish Kamran, she, her, at an 8 today. I am currently not directly engaging with tribal communities leadership. However, have found this session series helpful in supporting any future relationships which may come my way, which I hope do. Thank you for this space. Okay, Banish like a bee. I did not see that until I was, thank you for that. I love that. Okay, I think, okay, right here. Juan Pedro Moreno Olmeda. I hope I said that right. Physically feeling like a 4.5, but mentally I'm an 8. I have not engaged very much with tribal communities leadership, but I currently work for Unite Oregon and have learned to acknowledge and honor the original settlers of this land. I am grateful to be able to live on Kalapuyan land, and with Unite, we are looking for ways to be able to pay rent to the tribes whose land we have our events on. We are also working alongside our Indigenous staff to be able to come up with more ways to support and honor the land and Indigenous communities near us. Pronouns he, him. I think you might work with my Aunt Marcy. All right, thank you everybody. We got through introductions. Appreciate both in the chat, on screen, off screen, all the different ways people showed up today. I just want to remind folks that I know that took a while, but for me, it's very important that we bring into our spaces the time to connect as humans, and also just to take that time to learn more about one another, to kind of take the time to check in with ourselves and with the space that we're in, because sometimes we can be here and we're a 10, and other times we're a 2, and being able to show up in the way that you want to show up and that you are feeling. Like sometimes we don't have a choice if we're showing up as a 3 or a 4. It's just how the days rolled out. And so I just want to, and I think that's also pushing back on kind of this Western business practice where you just get to the work. And so I really like to make sure that we're taking the time in the space to honor ourselves, get to know one another, and be able to have that time to be human and to be able to talk about how we're feeling today. All right, so we will go on to the next. So just like last time, we're going to go into terms. And so I'm going to ask folks to take a healthy risk and read the terms. And so who would like to do tribal sovereignty?
Hi, Ken. This is Ellen. Just gonna make my gallery smaller. Okay. Tribal sovereignty. In the U.S. is the inherent authority of Indigenous tribes to govern themselves within the borders of the United States of America. The U.S. federal government recognizes tribal nations as domestic dependent nations and has established a number of laws attempting to clarify the relationship between the federal, state, and tribal governments.
Thank you. Federally recognized tribes.
I can read. This is Esther. Federally recognized tribes are individual sovereign nations. The U.S. government has a unique legal relationship with American Indian tribal governments as set forth in the Constitution of the United States, numerous treaties, statutes, federal court decisions, and executive orders. This relationship is derived from the political and legal relationship that Indian tribes have with the federal government and is not based upon race. Federally recognized tribes are those Native American tribes recognized by the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs for certain federal government purposes. There are currently 573 federally recognized tribes.
Okay. And just to note for that one, those are federally recognized tribes. Those aren't talking about state recognized or tribal nations that aren't recognized at all. Suzanne?
I can read tribal governments. They are separate sovereign nations with powers to protect the health, safety, and welfare of their members and to govern their lands. And I have a question for you. If there are currently 573 federally recognized tribes, do you have any idea what the number is if you were to count all those other state and self-identified tribes? How big would that number be?
I don't have that number, but if anybody in this group does, please drop it in the chat. And I just saw that that we went up to 574, which is amazing because that means that a tribe has federal recognition, and that's a celebration. And so I will update my slide. Thank you so much for that. I want to make sure I say your name right. Natalyn. Hopefully I said that right because she didn't come on and correct me. And so I will update my number. That is amazing. And then to answer your question, I don't have that number and I don't know what that is. I'm sure that we could probably Google that. However, I think the being able to count how many non-federally or non-state tribes there is, that might be difficult. Like here in Oregon, we have one that I am aware of, which is the Celilo village. And so that would be a really great research to do. I would be interested in that as well. That's something that has come up recently in the presentation that I'll be doing in California next week, is if there's an actual number for all of those, for all of the combined different levels of recognition and non-recognition. There are 63 state tribes. Awesome, thank you. I love the wealth of knowledge in this room right now. And I acknowledge that, thank you. Yeah, and it's always fluctuating because I think as we grow and learn also as tribal nations and tribal communities, we also learn more because remember, this whole system was not built for us. And so we're still also having to learn how to navigate and maneuver within a system that was not built for us. And so I would imagine that we're going to fluctuate, and some that aren't recognized might want to consider which option, state or federal. So just so a note, all these terms here that you read that have come from Julie Johnson from the Tribal Affairs. She's the Tribal Affairs Director for the state of Oregon. And so I just want to acknowledge her and where I got my terminology from, and just share, these are her how she defines it for her work within the state of Oregon. Thank you so much for the information, Esther, in the chat too. Again, I'm like I could geek out on all this stuff. And so the wealth of knowledge in this room is amazing. All right, so next we will go into tribal consultation. I actually I use this definition, but I'm actually going to be changing it. And I haven't had time to change it because like I said, I'm going to do a presentation next week on tribal consultation and tribal engagement. And in California, and one of the gals I'm working with, she's a head of the Heritage University in Washington. And we were going through our slide deck to start working on our presentation. And one of the things that she pointed out, which, for me, I was so appreciative of it. We're always being challenged, and sometimes we can always revert back to, kind of the way that we were assimilated or indoctrinated. And, I had to sit with it for a minute. But so when we were talking about this, let me move everybody's pictures over here. This definition, which comes from the Department of Interior, and it's consultation must be two-way dialogue and opportunity for joint decision-making on a nation-to-nation level that is more than a procedural or check the box exercise. And what I like about this definition is the discussion around two-way dialogue and the joint decision-making, and then also the kind of the call out of it's not just the check the box procedural exercise. But what she told me was this still comes from this perspective and this definition comes from basically the oppressor system. And it immediately clicked as soon as she said it. And I was just like in awe of like, oh my God, here's a moment. And so I'm going to go back and actually change this. And I'm trying to get a definition from either maybe NCAI, which is the National Congress of American Indians, or more locally ATNI, which is the Affiliated Tribes of the Northwest Indians, which do a lot of work. So ATNI does a lot of work regionally here on the West Coast, and then NCAI does national work across the country. But I really loved her point that this comes from our oppressors, from the colonizers' perspective when it comes from the Department of Interior, and we're still so in a way I'm centering that perspective. And I was like, ooh, and I loved it because I was like, okay, I need to change it, but I haven't got to change it since we had that conversation. So I will be, but I just kind of wanted to note that for folks, as you know, I just wanted to be transparent, I think, for myself, and just also, I think, as people are working with tribes and thinking about the way that you work, how you're showing up, and how sometimes we can revert back to, because in that moment, I shared with her how when I first went to Native Pathways program, which is at Evergreen State College, I really had to do a lot of decolonizing work because I really assimilated into the Western dominant school system and graduated at the top of my class, was able to navigate and function within a system that wasn't necessarily built for me or people like me. And so it took a lot of work to decolonize in the way that I showed up in the classroom. And so I think part of this, putting this, this is a great definition. However, when she said that, I was like, whoa, I didn't even think about it. I was just trying to make sure I gave a definition that was really rooted in the points that I liked out of it, but not thinking about where it came from. And so I think it was for me, it was a really good moment to reflect on whose perspective are we centering and uplifting. And in this case, I'm uplifting and centering the government, and so I need to switch that around. So I just wanted to share that. That might be a little bit of a long, lengthy, too much information, but then I also think it's very relevant because that shows that I'm also still learning. And this is a continued process of, when we're so ingrained and that assimilation has occurred through generations, that we're still unlearning. And that was a very moment for me to be able to process. And now I'm, really thinking about how to build in the perspective of tribal nations coming from in this training, in specifically this definition here. So okay, sorry, there's a question in the chat. But how much do we even honor this definition in as much as it comes from the oppressor system as it is in this country? Let me go back to it. Let me see if I can, how do I go back? There we go. I don't think I think there are folks out there that are, for the most part, kind of honoring that. But from my experience, we aren't honoring it. And I think that's why, for me, when I did put it in here, because my experience has been that it's not a two-way dialogue, that we aren't there at the table making decisions, and that it is a check the box, which is why I really liked this definition. But so to answer your question, I think you're right. We're not necessarily honoring it in this country. And I think there's a lot of, if people don't know about tribal consultation, then they don't know. And then also, I think there's many, many interpretations of tribal consultation. And that was a discussion we were having as we were talking about our presentation, is you know, we also have different variations of what tribal consultation means to us based off of our positionality. And so her, from a higher ed perspective, might be slightly different than my perspective as a community organizer and advocate on the ground. And not to say that neither one is less important than the other, but they might just be a little bit different. And so we also interpret this in a like in our own ways based off of our positionality. Okay. Let's see. Let me check time here. I know we have supposed to do a break. Okay, so oh, did I go too far? I might have went too far. Sorry, I did. Yeah. Okay. So there, for me, my experience has been that there's an informal approach and there's a formal, and both for me are equally important. And I'm trying to figure out where to put people because, hold on, I'm trying to navigate like the screen bar and pictures and everything. So, so formal is that nation to nation, and what that could look like. So that like nation to nation, that's tribe to the federal government. And then you can go to org to org, because tribal nations are also 501c3s, most of them are. And so then that's kind of an organization to organization. And so because like if an organization is wanting to do consultation, formal consultation, it, you know, you obviously can't be nation to nation, but it's that org to org, which is usually at the highest leadership. Formal does include our tribal council, or whoever is at the very top of leadership within tribal nations. Or this could also look like, so for example, the Portland area, like what I would see is this would be your organization with the, like, let's say the NAIA director. That would be what I would say could be a part of the tribal consultation. Although it's not with a tribal nation specifically, there's still a tribal community that's being represented. So the process for my tribe specifically, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, is you would go in and meet the tribal council, and then there, you know, you would start developing a like it would result in an MOU or a resolution of your formal agreements or your formal partnerships. But that would be going to our Secretary Treasurer and getting on our tribal council's agenda. And then I would also go even as far as not just on the agenda should be for mostly introductions and presenting, but I think there also needs to be some deeper discussions, because sometimes when you're in the council agenda, because they have set things, you might not get all the time to be able to dig deeper. And so there needs to be kind of a set time to be able to meet with them when they're not, or you ask them very clearly, like, we need an hour and a half because we really want to discuss an MOU with you and we want to co-create. You could also, within your formal process, you could hire a consultant to help you navigate to do the formal, to get to a formal agreement with tribes. Formal consultation agreements, you can build that up. Relationship building, like that's going to be the theme throughout all 3 sessions, is that relationship building piece. And then thinking about the policies and practices that you have as an organization around tribal consultation and what that looks like. And is that embedded into your organization and your practices and policies? If it's not, I would always recommend that you be proactive and just do that beforehand. A lot of times we wait for, like, examples, legislation to start doing it, when really we should just do it and not have to be told to do it. And so that can look like United States to tribal nation, director organization to secretary treasurer, who is essentially the person that connects you with tribal council. And so they're the person that is like that middle person to help. They're the support to our tribal council. And so they're have a big job. It's a really big job. There's legislative committees, so you can work with legislative committees, which is based on specific issues and topics. And if you remember the org chart, there was committees there. So you have like the education committee, which is the one that I serve on. You have health and welfare, which is related to anything health and welfare. You have culture and heritage, which is related to any of those, that's a really big umbrella. That's pretty much everything. You have our land use, which is related to anything that's, anything that's around our land. And then you have fish and wildlife on and off reservation. And then we also have a natural resources committee that is around natural resources. And then they all also work together when, we intersect with each other a lot. And so those are specific committees that you can work with. And a lot of times that's who you will work with, because you won't usually work directly with council. Like if you're working on a project or something, a lot of times you'll either go to the committees or you'll get delegated to a specific department or branch, because we have branches as well. And then, like I said, MOUs, resolutions with tribal council, usually that will come out. Like if you end up formalizing a consulting tribal council, take a breath here, formalized tribal consultation agreements. And sometimes you do get, like if you need an MOU for funding, or I've helped organizations get MOUs because they have a position that's working within the tribe and they're not under the tribe's umbrella, but within the MOU, it allows them to have physical space within the tribal government offices. And so, and there's MOUs for that. And then the levels you have, so all the different levels that our tribal nation has to work with, that's state, county, city, school districts, ESD districts, Head Start, all these different levels that we have to work with. And so we're not just working with one, we have many levels to who we work with. You can get formal letters of support or agreements. Letters of support would, for funding or for like, for example, when I ran for school board, I got a letter of support and endorsement from my tribal council. So there's a lot of things that they could do also in that realm. Built-in policies and practices, again, I talked about that, just building that in, because what happens if somebody leaves and then someone comes in and then you're starting from scratch? And so always trying to build in your policies and practices within your organization formally, so that the next person that steps in knows that that's part of the practices and policies. Are there any questions? Okay, I'm not hearing any. And again, just a reminder for those that weren't here last time, if you do have questions, drop them in the chat or raise your hand. And if we're gonna get to it, I'll let you know. If not, I'll answer it right then and there. I don't mind answering questions as we go. Okay, so informal. So informal is, it's very similar to the formal, but it's just informal. And so that can be organization to organization. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you are interested in doing a program with a tribe, and let's say they already have someone that's doing similar work, but you can still partner. And so then that would be, you see the next one that says staff to staff. That could be that staff to staff on a day-to-day where they're working together to do work together. And that's more informal. That's not the formal process. And so usually you would go through the formal to get to that informal, but you could also start at the formal to get to the informal, or to get to the formal, sorry. But that's, I've seen that done quite a bit, because that's also a part of that relationship building part of it, is being able to recognize that, you already done kind of an assessment of what a tribe has, and you're not coming in and saying, hey, we have this and we want to do this for you. Rather, hey, we see that you have this program. We also have a similar program, and we want to be able to partner together so that we can work together to provide a more robust services. You could have MOUs at an informal, and this gets sticky because it's a formal agreement, but it's like an informal agreement. It's not with like the top leadership, but we've done MOUs within branches. And so within the Health and Human Services branch, we've done MOUs with other organizations who want to come in and do work with us and need a space, for example. And the general manager was like, we don't need to take this one all the way up because there's no funding attached to it. And so it's just literally space. And so we created an MOU between our branch and their org, and they were able to come in and have a office space and partner with us, but there was no like legal funding attached to it. So we didn't have to go up to our council level for that MOU. You can also get letters of support and agreements from the branch levels, and those are a little less informal. They're still, again, this is like, it like overlaps between being formal and informal, but I put it under informal because formal is really that top leadership approval and getting, whether they vote or they sign off, all those things. And so, but there's, so there's ways to navigate without having to go all the way to the leadership level. And usually in the cases where I've seen we've not gone up is when the general manager's like, we don't need to, because it doesn't have, funding attached or things like that to make it have to be, because a lot of times when you do go up to council level, they'll have our lawyers review it. And sometimes you don't need to go to that extent. And usually the general managers will make that decision. They'll know when they need to go further. And that's so important, because if you're already building relationships with these branches at that more day-to-day operations or program and staff levels, you're going to be able to have those conversations with like that general manager at that level. And then they'll be able to help you decipher or decide, okay, it's time that we go up to leadership. And you can do both approaches I would recommend. But just making sure that you are building those relationships. Those relationships are really important. And so the informal can look like day-to-day operations, program to program, and that really day-to-day that doesn't include leadership. It's just that staff to staff or program coordinator to program coordinator. And I'm almost just repeating myself because relationship building. And then again, is this embedded into your policies and practices? All right, and these are just a little bit of some fun facts. I like to hold on, I gotta move boxes around. So in Oregon, and if you, let's see, hold on, sorry, I'm like having trouble moving the chat box. It's like right in the middle of, okay. So in Oregon, in 1975, they created the LCIS, which is the Legislative Commission on Indian Services, in order to improve services to tribal communities throughout Oregon. All nine federally recognized tribes in Oregon have a representative on the commission, and they engage with the state in consultation on various issues affecting tribal communities. Now, I would say that this, like going to this commission, doesn't replace tribal consultation. It adds to it, but I wouldn't recommend that this replaces tribal consultation, because if you actually go look at the LCIS, the commissioners, I don't think any of them, and I might be wrong, but I don't think any of them are actually so sorry, I gotta chat. I don't think any of them are from tribes specifically. They just represent tribes. And I'm not sure on the process of the commission. I'm sure that you have to be nominated and elected, and but I always put that in there because it's not a form of tribal consultation. SB 770, quarterly meetings with OHA, which includes the tribes, IHS programs, and tribal and urban RAN programs. And so this is, and we will, after this slide, we'll go into our break. So this is a cluster meeting that happens quarterly, and I have gotten to go to these. I really like them because you get basically you get updated on all the things that are happening with and for tribes, and all the different departments will come and present, and based off of the agenda and based off of like what's moving in legislation, what's happening at the national level, just all of those things. And I really like this meeting. This is also a really good place for folks to, if you are from like the state side of it, a good place to start connecting with the various tribes, because all 9 tribes plus NARA, and I'm not sure if NAGOs are there at this meeting on a quarterly basis. The Tribal Affairs Office, which is the OHA director. So you have the OHA Director's Office. They also work with the Medicaid, Mental Health, Public Health, Office of Equity and Inclusion, and the Native American Services at the Oregon State Hospital. And then throughout OHA, where tribes are impacted, they also work with. And just so you all are aware, in 2010, Oregon adopted the OHA Tribal Consultation Policy, which you can find on the Tribal Affairs website with the state of Oregon. And then SB 13, our tribal history, shared history. I need to change that. That was passed in, it's like 5 years ago or 4 years ago. I can't remember. I just like to share that as a resource. And then Portland is the 9th, and this is, I think, a few years old, but Portland is the 9th largest Native American population in the USA. And I just like to share that because I want people to realize how, you know, in the Portland metro area, how big the Native population is there. With that, we will take a break. Can you all let me know how long the break is? $10 minutes. Okay. So I will see everybody back here at 2:17. So we will get started. All right, so we will go on to what it looks like. And then I just want to note in the chat, I believe Owen had a, I don't know if it's necessarily a question, but just looking for, I think, support and maybe resources. If anybody has any ideas, suggestions, please feel free to answer him in the chat or connect. And then I'll try to tackle that at the end. That's a big question, Owen, which telling by the way you worded it, you know that it is. All right, so we're gonna get into what does tribal consultation look like? And so it looks like as early as possible. So before decisions are made, they're not set in stone, because if you, let's say you draft up something and you're like, we're just gonna draft this up and kind of put the parameters of what we want, and then we'll go to the tribe and and show them this and then see where they want to fill in or where they can fit in. What you're doing is you're already creating the parameters and the boundaries. And so therefore, in some ways, limiting the tribes and also making pre-made decisions. And so even though the intent is great, you like, I want to get ahead, it still is a harmful practice. And so the early, the better. So if you can bring them on before any decisions are made, that's great. Sometimes we're in positions where that's just not possible. What I would recommend is just being transparent about that and just be like, we're on a deadline. Sorry, we're coming in this late in the game. And we know that this, we'll do better the next time, but this is a situation. Communication throughout. So communicating throughout the process. So if you're trying to come to an agreement, let's say you're wanting an MOU with the tribes, just having that consistent communication throughout the process. Honest, open, and meaningful. And I feel like meaningful gets tossed around a lot. To me, meaningful means that you're transparent, you're honest, and that you understand the impacts of which the process that you're going through. And so when you're looking at that intent versus impact, you're looking at the impact rather than the intent, because we always want to look at the impact, because even though our intentions might be well and good, the impact could still be negative and harmful. Timely. The process can move at the speed of trust. And I always like to say this because trust, with tribes, it's one of the things that is really hard to gain. And because of the history. So when you look back at the history, whether it's the federal government or organizations or funding or churches or school systems, that trust has been broken over and over and over. And so that history piece is really important to understand and know, and how that then shows up in our ability to trust. And so that's why that relationship building is so important, to build that trust. And so just understanding that, again, going back to the Western kind of business time frame of everything seems to be urgent, understanding that it's not always going to go that way. And that sometimes you might need to slow down the process, and that might mean not doing certain things and really checking yourself. Transparent, being really transparent about your intent, your goals, your whys. And because I've been in situations where where we were being asked, like, we wanted to partner on a grant, and then I was like, okay, well, what's in the grant? And this was in cases where they already wrote the grant. And so I've had organizations just send me the one piece where the tribes fit in, and they didn't send me the rest of it. And to me, that was a red flag, because you should be able to share the entire document, the entire grant, so that the tribes understands what they're getting and where they're written in. For one, I would not recommend writing tribes in if you don't have their permission and you don't have a relationship with them. Please don't use their data. Please don't write them in. That's just very inappropriate. And so you really need that permission to do that. And that goes for even communities. And I know that's hard and that takes time, but a lot of times tribal communities, and I think just marginalized communities in general, we get written in because, unfortunately, philanthropy likes to see kind of that negative data that then gets you funding. And so really being mindful with the way that you are including community tribal nations into your grants. And because a lot of times in my experience in my community is, we've been researched and then our data is used in grants to get funding. And then those services actually don't really come out to be kind of how it was written, only because we were data sets within that process. And they didn't actually come and say, hey, community, what do you need? What's the approaches we could use in order to better serve you? So being transparent about what you are willing to do, even if you're just like, we got these funds. And again, I would not recommend writing communities into your grants unless you already have a relationship with them. But in the cases that way you don't, being transparent about that, like, oh, we messed up, we'll do better the next time, and admitting those things. Being in community, location does matter. I've served on several different committees and boards where I always have to travel to them. And, I'm like, hey, you guys need to come to my community. We need to do, like, you need to come here. You want to serve here. We're in your region. Yeah, you don't want to meet here. You need to meet here. And so location does matter, even within the city. Excuse me. Like if you're in Portland and you're always meeting in one area, like just think of maybe think of a family that that lives outside of that area, and just the amount of work it takes for them to actually get to, whether it's your event, your services, whatever it is. Like, what does it take for a person to get to you if they live in Beaverton, but you're doing all your services are in Clackamas? And that's the same thing here. Warm Springs, a lot of times I had to go to Bend. And so I started asking questions and saying, hey, location does matter. And you guys are saying you serve Warm Springs, you need to come to Warm Springs, because that can be broken up where you move your locations around, and that's more equitable for people to access. And then also, like when you are meeting, like example, if you are meeting with, let's just say Siletz, for example, if you're in the Siletz area, try to go to them instead of inviting them to you. Go to them and go. Just being in the community, you also be able to physically see, but also, you might get to interact with other folks from the community, and it's just I think it's a better approach, and it's more meaningful, and it just, taking that time to be in community in those locations. Consistent and building relationship. Being consistent while you're building that relationship is so important. Whether it's being able to just go to a meeting that maybe that tribe has a meeting every month that you can go to, you don't have nothing to say, you don't have anything to report, but you can be in community and you're building those relationships and you're hearing about what's happening in the community. We have it's called Native Aspirations, and it's held once a month, and it's for any organization that is providing services to the community here in Warm Springs. So I invite people to that all the time. Like if you're wanting to build relationships with my community, or you're wanting to offer services, that would be a great place to start learning what's being offered here. Where can you jump in? And knowing what's actually happening, because maybe you're trying to bring a service that we already offer, and you'll find that out in this meeting. And then you're meeting people within the community, because most of the time at this meeting specifically, majority of those people live in the community. So you're not only meeting people that work in the community, but you're meeting people that live in the community. And then that just, builds the relationship. And then follow up. Follow up is so important, especially for tribes. We, being in the role that I was in was really difficult, because it was like I was holding several weights. And so having people follow up, like if we met, we had a meeting, and then the next week you follow up and be like, hey, it was really nice to meet with you, and I know we have some next steps. That's really helpful for tribes, because we have so much things going on that for me, those follow-ups were really nice. And then a good reminder for me to be like, oh yeah, I had tasks to do, but also it continues that relationship building as well. Okay, oh, my thing is being slow. Okay, what does it not look like? And these are just pretty much going to mirror what it looks like. It's, you know, opposite mirror. I don't know how to say that. It doesn't look like pre-made decisions before an initial meeting. Again, if you can avoid that, I would highly recommend bringing people in to help make decisions that are from, and that can go for any, that's not just for tribal nations, that's for community, you know, pulling in the people that are that you're serving. Like, is your planning team reflective of the community you're serving? That can go for anybody, not just tribal nations. Bringing in the tribe or the organization after the fact. Again, I saw that a lot with grants, with funding. You know, we were being written into grants, and this is a common practice. One that I've actually personally, you know, the different variation of boards that I sit on for philanthropy, I actually am trying to push for a process where if you name a tribe, there needs to be a process that tribe acknowledges that you're naming them. The white savior approach. This goes back to what I was just talking about. Like, if you go to those monthly meetings or a meeting that is open, if you're coming in and you're like, let's say you write a grant, right? And you have this curriculum and this program, and you're like, I want to come into Warm Springs and I'm going to offer this because we feel like you guys need it. You know, your substance use numbers are really high, and so we're going to come in and we're going to teach you how to get sober. That is, for one, that is a very white savior approach, because we don't need people to come in and save us. We have the tools and the ability to do that ourselves. A lot of the times we just need the resources and the support to do it in the way that we need to do it, because we are intelligent, we are resourceful, we are skilled, we have our cultural teachings and our traditional languages and all of those things to be able to do these things on our own. We just need the support and often the resources to do it. And so when you're coming in and you already have a pre-made curriculum that is from a Western perspective, you're leaving out that Indigenous perspective. You're leaving out the tribes to help build something that actually could work for them. And it's really harmful when you come in and assert the way that you learn over the traditional knowledge and ways of being within tribal communities and tribal nations. The day before, the week of, like if you're writing a grant and you're like, hey, I need, you know, we have a week until the deadline. That's really hard for tribal nations to do that, because again, it depends on what level it needs to be approved. So sometimes there can be a support letter that's done by the general manager that week because she has openings. Other times she's like, this has to go to council because this is over the threshold of what I can sign off on, or there's certain things within it. And our council only meets the first 2 weeks of every month. The last 2 weeks, they don't meet. So you won't get anything done. And usually you have to get on their agenda the month prior. For me, I do it 2 months ahead. So if I'm trying to get on council's agenda and I know I need something done, like let's say if this week, I know I have something that's due in, you know, a couple of months, I would have put in my request probably last month. So in August to get on October's agenda, because that gives them time to get me in. There are times where you can get in on a whim if they have an opening and they don't have full agendas, but I don't take that risk. So I usually recommend at least a month ahead. So if we're trying to get on, let's say I'm trying to get on October's agenda, I'm probably not gonna now because I just seen the October agenda come out for council. So I would then get bumped to Novembers. And so just thinking about, you know, the process of which the tribe you're working with, what is their process? Do you know their process? Do you know their timelines? What do they want? How do they want you to do that? And, you know, because some other tribes, like there's one down south where they only meet on set days of the week, and that's it. And so we all have different processes for each, and it changes from tribe to tribe. You might be on mute.
Hi, you know, I'm in Oregon, and I appreciate you mentioning that there was a tribal commission created as long ago as 1975. And then now there are, you've just been explaining to us that it's essential to connect the parties involved with each other who have real authority. What's behind my comment is my reflection that, for example, it seems to me like there are dozens and dozens of governors' commissions that people are appointed to, and other commissions that have no real authority in our state. And they oftentimes meet and might be shown what you have described to us in many cases is, look at what we're doing here. Isn't this nice? You know, and we're spending money and time in getting people together when the real planning and the real decisions and the power to really make things happen lie elsewhere. And it seems like in many cases we're wasting our time, or it's confusing for some of us out in the community to even know who to go to.
Yeah, and it's really complex because each tribe is different. And so some tribes might say, you know, we are okay with the way that the LCIS, their recommendations. Other tribes might be like, no, we do not want them to speak on our behalf. And it changes, right, with leadership. Mm-hmm. So for my tribe, every 3 years, we get new leadership if people aren't nominated back and elected back in. And so, for example, this last council, there was only 3 council people that actually stayed on. And so you had almost a whole brand new council. So our council has 11 members, and 3 of them are chiefs. And so we have 8 total members. 3 of those were stayed on. No, yes, 3 of them stayed on, which meant 4 were brand new. I think 4, no, 5. 5 were brand new. And so now, you know, so that really slows the work down because you're onboarding people. Yeah. And so, but it shifts, and it's really complicated. And that's why for me, like if you are working with a specific tribe, you know, asking those questions, how do you want us to navigate? How do you want us to communicate? Who do you want us to communicate with? You know, and what is your process for X, Y, and Z? So like you could ask, what is your process for MOUs? What is your process for grant funding or grant applications? And then hopefully they can direct you, because most of the time, I guess at the state level, you would be working with all 9 tribes, I would suspect, unless you have a specific region of the state. And then that's where I would say I would direct you to the tribal affairs director to work with her, and then she can help you navigate that. But it's very complex. And that's why most of my training, it can be used broadly. but a lot of it is from my experience as the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. And so just remembering that's where my perspective is coming from. It's from one tribe. And I can't even really speak for my entire tribe. I'm speaking on my experiences and the processes I've seen, the processes I know. And then because I am only one person, I can barely speak for myself. And so just remembering that part too, is each tribe is different and unique. And then even as they break down into their structures, that gets unique as well. And so if you are working with multiple tribes, I would recommend asking each individual tribe, how do you want us, where do you want us to show up? How do you want us to show up? What are your processes? And learning, digging more into the details, because I'm giving you a very broad perspective here. Thank you for that question and that feedback. So expecting an immediate response or decision, again, some tribes might have someone that is, able to do that for them. Other tribes might not. And so it really depends. Each tribe is different, but I wouldn't expect an immediate response or decision, depending on that decision. I know in my role, I'm able to decipher what goes up and what I can decide on, but a lot of times I have to go to the general manager and say, hey, is this what should we do here? Can you say yes or no, or do we need to go further up the chain? And she'll let me know, and then I go back to the person and say, this is what we're going to do. But a lot of times, that's, if she's not on travel or if she's busy, I can't get in, so don't expect an immediate response or decision. I know that, and that's a very Western approach of like, you need to get back to me within 48 hours. That doesn't necessarily work for tribes because there is a different process. They come to us versus us going to them. Just back to that, having equitable meeting locations so that everybody has the ability to access, whether it's resources or meetings or events. Just thinking about where are your events and where are the people coming from? And is there no way to be able to break down some of those barriers and challenges throughout the year? And then I never recommend one and dones because, my theme that you'll see throughout is relationship building. And so if you're trying to build relationships, the one and dones, do not do that. And what I mean by one and dones is like, if you, let's say, you got a grant and you're like, oh, I have to go do an event on the reservation. And then you do one event and then that's it. And now you get to count that on your grant application or your grant report. You're like, I had an event on the reservation and I got 76 people that attended and you checked that box. I don't recommend that because it needs to be a continuous relationship. And so really building those relationships. Okay, looking at time. I'll go through these really fast because I want to get to the best practices. And so I was trying to be fancy and have them come in my cool slides, but I end up doing them backwards. So we're going to count down from 2 to 1. And so these are just 2 examples. The example 2 is they meet with the tribes or a program and they discuss potential grant application. They kind of take an assessment of the capacity of the tribe, what they can and can't do, what they're able to contribute and what they can't contribute. And then you co-write an application or a letter of support is provided by that tribe. And then you fully resource the relationship and the work, and you're building up this, whatever you're building up in the community with that tribe. And then let's say a position was built into that, and that person is in the community 4 days a week, and then 1 day a week they're outside of the community because there's trainings or they have to connect with their entire team because it's a regional effort, and then they continue to build relationships. This would be my recommendation in the way that you operate with tribes, specifically around funding, but just around relationship building in general. And then this scenario 1, and I will just say, scenario one, more specifically, I've actually experienced this, and this was written based off of one of my experiences, just one of my experiences. And so this organization applied for a grant. They wrote the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs into their grant, and they contacted us and was like, hey, we got these funds. We wrote you in, and this is what it's for. And they said it's for a position for 10 hours that's dedicated to Warm Springs, to the Warm Springs community. And then the staff, and so outside of those 10 hours, we will be asking that staff to come to Bend for 20 hours a week. And the grant period is two years, and we would really like a office space for that staff for that 10 hours. And this is what the program is. And so they laid that all out for us. And I was the one, so I usually have to filter everything that goes through before it gets to the general manager. And I said, no. I want to see the entire grant. And so it ended up being where we were getting a very slim amount compared to what they actually got. And then, you know, just the 10 hours in the community, like that doesn't do anything. That does nothing for us. And on top of that, our tribe already had a very similar program to what they were trying to offer with this position. What they could have done is contacted us before they applied for this grant and said, hey, we're applying for this grant. This is our program. This is how, this is what we were thinking. And we could have turned around and said, we have a tribal program that's exactly the same. What we would like is if you could match our position, and maybe so then our position can extend their period of time, and we can actually use your resources so that we can now offer more resources to community. So then you're matching our staff, paid staff time. And so we had to go, we had to basically backtrack. I said, we're not doing this. We need and they were like, well, we got a grant. What do you want us to do? And part of me wanted to say, give that grant back or take the tribes out of it and you talk to the funder because you got yourself into this. But my general manager said, let's figure out a way to get to work with this and let's correct the way that this organization works with us. And so I ended up pretty much kind of doing this training with them. And then we came out to an agreement of how to implement their grant that would support our program that we had. But I do not recommend this approach at all. It's very harmful and it's really, to me, disrespectful to the tribes because it's the white savior approach. They didn't consult with the tribes to find out what the tribes were doing, if they had anything similar, and if they could just come in and support and partner with, rather than coming in and saying, we have this program that we think your community members would benefit from, and we think it's the best. When we were already had developed something that was very similar, just through the tribal perspective. If you have done this, or if you are in the middle of doing this, what I would say is just be transparent and say, I didn't know that this was not an appropriate approach. I apologize. We know now, and we will do better. That's much better than I think not continuing with a partnership or continuing to build that relationship, because we all make mistakes. We all don't know everything. And especially if you aren't working with tribes, you won't know this. And so that's not to let people off the hook, but that's also, we have to realize that we're human and this isn't everyday shared information. So if you aren't working with tribes, you might not know this, because there is resources out there for you to look up and learn some of these, but there isn't detailed information like this. And that's what I learned being in my position with the tribes, was organizations didn't know how to navigate and work with our branch and our tribe which is what led me to this training, was because I wanted to lessen the harm and the negative impacts that my community was dealing with from outside organizations, whether it was funding or programs that we were trying to bring in. It's not that we don't want the partnership, it's just we are tribal nations. We do have our own traditional knowledge and languages and history and all those things that we want weaved into the way that we are servicing our people. And so just please don't do scenario number one. And if you do or you have, just take it as a learning experience, think about it. And now that you know, you can do better. Okay. So best practices. Let me check time here. We got 10 minutes. This is the last slide. So best practices, asking the questions, how will or does this impact tribes? So if you work with tribes or tribal communities, and that includes like in Portland, like if you are working with the urban native community, you can insert that in here. This doesn't have to just pertain to, tribal nations, because I would bet, I haven't lived in the, I went to school in Portland for a little bit, but I would bet that there is tribal leadership in Portland. Might not be from a tribal nation structural, institutional framework, but I bet there's tribal leaders in the community who, if you went and you said, hey, I want to organize this, or I want to, there's just tribal leaders, and they don't have to be like in that official capacity of a tribal nation. Because when you look back at history, folks that are in the urban area, they came from different tribes too, because of the whole, have mostly men, sending our men to the larger cities to do work. And so they were sending them away from their communities. And so when you're thinking about like the context, yes, we're talking about tribal nations on reservations, but there's also that also comes out in the Native urban community. Relationship building and making connections. I've said that over and over. Decolonizing time, so that urgent over respecting time and process. And so really thinking about like, how do you see time? And is everything really urgent, or can it wait sometimes? Being consistent and persistent. I love that one because that one really leads to relationship building. Proactive, being proactive, whether that's building it into your policies without having to be asked, or just being proactive in putting it in your policies so that it doesn't change when someone leaves. Creating space, who's on your boards, who's on your planning teams, who's on your advisory committees, who's on your staff. If you're working with tribal communities, do you have tribal people on staff? Embedding into, and so how are you embedding cultural practices into your organization? So for example, I don't know if I talked about this in the last one, but just like certain cultural teachings, like here within funerals, for example, we have funeral leave here, and our funeral leave isn't only for immediate family, which is usually children, mother, father. Ours is just family, defined how we define it. And so, like if that's my cousin from like my mother's side, like that's okay, I can go, that still counts. And because in our way, we have really large families, and we don't just consider our immediate family. We have very, very branched out families. And so like a lot of our cousins, our first cousins, are like brothers and sisters. And so within our funeral policy, it's not defined for us, it's how we define it. And so thinking about that, like even with other people, like what are those norms and cultural teachings and practices, and can you embed those into your policies and practices? and honor the people that are within your organization or within the communities you're serving. And your leadership, I already asked about, you know, who serves on your boards and all of those things. Resource the work. So if you have asks, please resource them. And that can be done in different ways. You know, that's monetary, but that can also be like gas cards, food cards, providing dinner, providing lunch, bus passes, things like that. Doing education, much like this training, you know, this is a great way to have a best practice. And you can also, like if you have an onboarding process, maybe thinking about like, what does that look like and how can they have something like this when they're onboarding? Being transparent, you know, just being honest and open, and, you know, like just maneuvering like you would in your everyday relationships. How do you want to be worked with, and how do you want to have people treat you and show up for you, and how do you show up for people? Being mindful. I don't know why 9 is larger than all the other ones, but somehow it got larger. But being mindful of tribal capacity. So just being patient with folks that are from tribes, because sometimes they're holding multiple roles, just because sometimes resources aren't there. And so just being mindful of that. All right. And these are just some questions that I like to put here. I don't know if I've ever got to an actual debrief because it's a lot of information, but I like to leave people with these questions just to think about as we get ready for the next one. And then just thinking about like, as you go into your work week and into your work. And so what did you learn today? What did you take away? How will you use what you learned in your daily life or your work? And then did any feelings come up, and why? And just, you know, processing those. We have 4 minutes. And so I'm going to open it up for questions or comments. Yes, love.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a comment in regards to the capacity that the tribes have, and going into a season, the fall season, and what it means for many of our tribes, just to be very aware of our limitations. Jalen, when you were talking about us wearing many hats and the capacity that we have, all too often people call and they want support, help, or us to do a letter of support for them. However, they've never engaged with our communities. And there's a sense of urgency as if like we kind of owe them something, and we are supposed to function like folks do outside of our communities. And it's really, truly, it's a good way to kill your project or get us to, you know, be discouraged and wanting to believe that what you have written in your grant is really going to come to fruition. Another thing too is that I just wanted to agree with you also in regards to all too often with research, folks come into our communities, they want us to come and sign these little things for $25 Visa gift cards. There's this lure that we can be bought. So be very, very mindful and careful with honorariums in the way that they are offered. Sometimes I think it's best to ask, you know, to compensate for your time, other than saying, if you attend this, we'll give you a card, because that's that old adage of like, we can be bought. So I just also wanted to commend you for a very well done speaker series today. I have been so excited sitting here squirming in my chair, and I just want to thank you for your words and for a very well done presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for adding all of those. Yes, I agree. And I think that's where the relationship building part, it comes into play. So if you have somebody that's on the ground, they're going to be able to say like, this is what we could provide. So like for me, when I do consulting work and someone wants to come in, I don't just say yes to anybody. It really is, there is a vouching system. And if you aren't building relationships, most likely you're not going to get into the community. And so really thinking about that relationship building piece is so important to trust. And then if you do have someone on the ground, they're going to be able to say, this is what the community needs, or this is what's appropriate, and this is what's not appropriate. And so if you're trying to come in and do any, I've seen people try to come into my community and, be like, here's 25. It was funny because you said $25. And I was like, that's a number that always gets brought up in my community. And I'm like, no, that's nothing. That's nothing for my community. And we're not going to do that. Because it just seems like, I don't know where they're getting that number, but it always seems $25. And so, I've seen and where they've gotten nobody, they're like, and it is that, because people, even though you're putting out that money, depending on what the issue is, they're not showing up for the money, they're showing up for the issue. The added, whatever you end up giving them is the value of what they came to provide, because people want to be included and they're not, it's just, yes, I agree with everything that you said. And thank you so much for the words in the ad. And I also, you reminded me about fall time. And when you think about people's capacities, because we also have our cultural traditions and our foods and different pieces of our culture. And so like me, when I'm spring and summer, I'm gathering foods. And so I always tell people, like, if you're trying to get a hold of me, I might be out for a few days because I'm out gathering our traditional foods, and you just got to be patient. And if you know you need things from me in advance, get to me as soon as you can, because I'm not gonna put my traditional practices aside because you are in a hurry, because I'm just not. It's a lot of pushing back on Western practices and ways of trying to really honor our ways of being, where there's been points in our ancestors and our grandparents and our parents' times where they weren't able to do that because they were being told that they had to do X, Y, and Z, and they didn't get a choice. Yes. And yes, to the note about the performative for Native American Heritage Month, like we should be doing that work all year long, and it shouldn't just show up in November. So if your organization is only doing stuff during November, I would really reconsider in the way that you're honoring tribes, tribal communities, and Native Americans in this country, and Indigenous folks. So I know we're a little bit over time. Thank you all. Is there anybody else that has questions? I can stay on for a few more minutes. I am not hearing any. And so thank you all so much for joining, and we will see you all in, I think it's two weeks. And thank you so much for your time and your attention and being here today. And I hope you have a really great week this week.
Thank you all. We'll see you on the 25th at the same time. I'm also dropping a quick link for a feedback form, but don't worry if you don't get a chance. We will definitely see you all next time. Thank you to the interpreters as well and all the tech team. Really appreciate you. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you, Jaylene.